December the 20th, 1943. 27,000 feet above the freezing, pale grey expanse of the North Sea, 20 miles off the coast of Bremen, Germany. The air up here is thin, hostile and lethal. The temperature sits at a bone-snapping minus 60 degrees Fahrenheit. If you were to step outside, your lungs would freeze before you hit the ground. But inside the cockpit of a Focke-Wulf FW190A8 interceptor, Lieutenant Erich Kessler is sweating. The heavy rhythmic thrum of his BMW 800 114-cylinder radial engine vibrates through the soles of his fleece-lined boots, a mechanical heartbeat syncing with his own racing pulse. Through the armoured glass of his canopy, the sky is scarred with black, greasy blossoms of flak, anti-aircraft artillery bursting in concussive shockwaves that rattle his teeth. And there they are, the Americana. They stretch across the horizon in a massive, stepped-up combat box formation, a staggered three-dimensional grid of heavy metal designed to project a deadly, overlapping crossfire in every conceivable direction. They are the Boeing B-17 flying fortresses of the US 8th Air Force. To Erich and his fellow Luftwaffe pilots, they are Die Dicken Autos, the fat cars. They are massive, four-engine beasts that blot out the sun, their bare aluminum skins catching the harsh, high-altitude light like mirrors of doom. Erich's mission, dictated by the Reich Air Ministry, is simple. Break the formation, isolate a straggler, and annihilate it. He scans the armada. The B-17S are flying tight, maintaining their interlocking defensive screen. But then he spots his prey. It is a B-17F on the lower, trailing edge of the formation. The bomber, christened Iron Rain by her crew, has already taken a brutal beating from the coastal flak batteries. Her No. 3 engine, the inner starboard right R1820 Cyclone, is feathered, its three-bladed propeller standing dead and motionless in the screaming slipstream. A thick trail of black, oily smoke bleeds from the cowling, painting a grim streak across the frigid sky. The massive bomber is struggling to maintain altitude, slowly falling behind the protective umbrella of her sisters. In the ruthless mathematics of aerial combat, a straggler is a dead ship. Inside the unpressurized fuselage of Iron Rain, the reality is a nightmare of noise, cold, and sheer terror. First Lieutenant Thomas "Tommy" Hayes grips the yoke with hands wrapped in thick, electrically heated gloves that are already failing. His oxygen mask bites into his face, his breath condensing and freezing instantly on the rubber. The noise inside the cockpit is apocalyptic, a deafening, unending roar of wind tearing through the uninsulated metal tube, the mechanical screaming of the surviving three engines, and the terrified crackling voices of his crew over the intercom. "Bandits, 6 o'clock high, coming out of the sun." The frantic voice of the tail gunner, Sergeant Miller, cuts through the static. In his cramped, freezing plexiglass bubble at the extreme rear of the bomber, Miller is kneeling on spent brass casings. He grips the twin .50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns, his eyes wide as he tracks the incoming threat. The Focke-Wulf is a terrifying silhouette, its yellow nose spinning like an angry hornet as it plunges toward them. Erich pushes his throttle forward, the FW190 surging into a blistering dive. He feels the G-forces press him back into his seat. The airspeed indicator needle climbs past 400 miles per hour. He targets the B-17's broad tail section and the vulnerable right-wing root where the massive fuel tanks are housed. He waits until the bomber fills his Revi 16B reflector gun sight. He needs to be close, point blank. He wants to see the rivets. At 300 yards, Erich squeezes the trigger on his control stick. The FW190 shudders violently as its formidable armament unleashes hell. Two 13mm MG131 machine guns in the engine cowling, and four 20mm MG151/20 cannons in the wing roots roar to life. A torrential stream of armour-piercing, explosive and incendiary rounds rips through the thin air. For a German fighter pilot, the 20mm cannon Menengeschoss, mine shell, is the ultimate bomber killer. It is a high-capacity explosive round designed with a thin steel casing, maximising the amount of explosives packed inside. When it strikes an aircraft's aluminum skin, it doesn't just punch a hole, it detonates a split second after penetrating, blowing massive jagged panels of metal completely off the airframe from the inside out. Erich watches with grim satisfaction as his rounds find their mark. Sparks shower from the fuselage of Iron Rain, like a fireworks display gone wrong. Erich sees a 20mm explosive shell detonate directly on the bomber's left horizontal stabilizer. A massive chunk of the tail rips away, vanishing into the slipstream. He walks his rudder pedals, sweeping a deadly hose of fire across the B-17's midsection. The thin duralumene skin of the bomber tears like wet tissue paper. He can actually see into the waist of the bomber. A gaping, ragged hole has been punched right through the side. Inside the waist of the B-17, the world dissolves into a tornado of shrapnel, wind, and screaming metal. The waist gunners are thrown to the floor as the explosive shells detonate. The concussive blasts rip the oxygen lines from the walls. Frigid, -60-degree air blasts into the cabin at 160 miles per hour, instantly turning the interior into a screaming, white-out blizzard of frost and pulverized debris. Eric pulls back hard on his stick, his Focke-Wulf screaming directly over the top of the stricken bomber, missing the top turret by mere feet. He banks hard to the left, pulling high into the sun to set up his next pass, waiting for the inevitable. He waits for the death spiral. He waits for the B-17 to snap in half. He waits for the catastrophic fuel explosion that usually follows a direct cannon hit to the wing root. 420mm cannon shells are usually enough to take down any heavy bomber in the world. Eric just pumped at least 20 into this one. But as he clears his turn and looks down, his jaw tightens. He blinks, wiping a gloved hand across his goggles as if clearing a smudge. Iron Rain is still flying. Not just falling with style, she is flying. Despite missing half her left elevator, despite a hole in her fuselage large enough to drive a Volkswagen through, despite her No. 3 engine spewing a continuous river of smoke, the massive bomber is maintaining a level, albeit shaky, trajectory. It defies everything Eric knows about aerodynamics, structural engineering, and the laws of physics. The German pilot stares at the smoking silver cross below him, a profound sense of disbelief washing over him. The B-17 shouldn't be airborne. It should be a tumbling, flaming coffin, scattering its crew and its debris across the whitecaps of the North Sea. Instead, he sees the twin barrels of the bomber's top turret tracking his movement. The waist gunner, somehow still alive and standing in the freezing hurricane of the open fuselage, opens fire. Tracers zip past Eric's canopy, glowing deadly red. They are still fighting. The secret to this impossibility lies in the genius of American aeronautical engineering. The B-17 wasn't just built, it was over-engineered. Boeing engineers had designed the flying fortress with a web of heavy, overlapping internal ribs and longerons. It possessed a level of structural redundancy that was practically alien to the lighter, more agile fighters as of the era. If one structural member was blown completely away, the load was instantly distributed to the surrounding framework. The bomber was designed to take a beating that would atomize an ordinary aircraft and still drag its crew home. But Eric doesn't care about Boeing's engineering. He only cares about the kill. Frustration, hot and bitter, overrides his shock. He curses into his throat microphone, banks his fighter violently on its wingtip, and pushes the nose down for a second, high deflection pass. If 20 cannon shells didn't do the job, he will give them 60. He will saw the monster's wing off himself if he has to. Inside Iron Rain, Tommy Hayes wrestles with the heavy controls. The bomber is sluggish, violently vibrating, fighting him for every foot of altitude. The control cables feel loose, spongy. "Damage report," he screams into his microphone, his voice raw. "Half the tail is gone, Skipper," Miller yells back, his voice trembling. "Waist is open. We're freezing back here." "Keep those guns firing. Do not let him set up," Tommy barks back. He looks out his side window. The yellow-nosed Focke-Wulf is banking again, a predatory shark circling a wounded whale. The sky is empty of friendly P-47 Thunderbolts or P-51 Mustangs. They are entirely alone, hundreds of miles from the safety of the English Channel, trapped in a mortally wounded machine, with a relentless killer turning back in for the slaughter. Eric's Focke-Wulf screams down from the frigid stratosphere, a lethal yellow-nosed predator diving at a terrifying 450 miles per hour. This time, he is not aiming for the fuselage. He wants the right wing root. He wants to sever the structural spar that attaches the massive wing to the aircraft, aiming to trigger a catastrophic structural failure that no amount of American engineering can mitigate. He lines up the crippled bomber in his Revi gun sight. The B-17 grows larger, filling the glass. The twin .50 caliber machine guns from the bomber's top turret, manned by Technical Sergeant Rossi, spit a continuous stream of tracer fire, desperately trying to swat the German fighter away. Eric ignores the glowing red orb zipping past his canopy. He waits. 200 yards. 150. Fire. His thumb clamps down on the stick. The FW190 shudders violently as the remaining 20mm explosive rounds tear from the wing roots. The Menengeschoss shells slam into the right wing of Iron Rain with devastating precision. Eric watches in grim fascination as the explosive impacts walk across the leading edge of the wing, ripping through the aluminum skin and detonating against the internal structure. A massive chunk of the aileron shears away, fluttering wildly into the slipstream. Then a direct hit to the No. 4 engine, the outer starboard cyclone. The engine, cowling, violently blows apart in a shower of twisting metal and black smoke. The propeller stops dead, its blades bent backward like broken fingers. Iron Rain now has 2 dead engines on its right side. The aerodynamic drag is immense, pulling the massive bomber violently to the right. To Eric, this is the killing blow. With asymmetric thrust pushing solely from the left, the aircraft must enter a flat spin. The wing must fold. It is simple physics. Inside the cockpit of the bomber, physics has become a physical adversary. The instant the No. 4 engine dies, the heavy control yoke violently whips to the right, nearly tearing Tommy Hayes' arms from their sockets. "Davy, I need you!" Tommy screams to his co-pilot, Second Lieutenant David Collins. Both men throw their entire body weight against the left side of their yokes. They stand on the left rudder pedals, their leg muscles screaming in agony, fighting the massive aerodynamic force trying to flip the bomber onto its back. They are no longer flying the aircraft. They are wrestling it. The control cables, damaged by the flak and cannon fire, are loose and unresponsive. Every correction requires brutally hard, synchronized physical labor. "Trim it out! Trim it out!" Davy yells, his face pale behind his oxygen mask, sweat freezing on his brow despite the -60-degree cold. Tommy reaches for the trim wheels, but they spin uselessly. "Trim cables are shot. It's all muscle and wire now, kid. Hold her steady." Outside, Eric Kessler pulls up out of his dive, pulling heavy G-forces as he banks back around to witness the bomber's final death plunge. He levels out alongside the B-17, hovering just a few hundred yards away from the shattered right wing, but the death plunge never comes. Eric's jaw clenches. Through his polarized goggles, he stares at the American bomber in absolute, unadulterated disbelief. Iron Rain is a flying junkyard. Her tail is shredded, the left elevator a jagged stump. A gaping 10-foot hole exposes the interior of the waist, where Eric can see the gunners, tethered by their monkey tails, fighting to stay upright in a hurricane of freezing wind. The right wing looks as though it has been chewed on by a metallic leviathan. Huge sections of the skin are simply gone, exposing the skeletal, twisted longerons and severed fuel lines inside. Only 2 engines are running. Yet the behemoth maintains its course. It is crabbing sideways through the sky, vibrating so violently that Eric can see the metal fatiguing, but it is not falling. He pushes his throttle forward to finish the job, but as he depresses the firing button, nothing happens. A hollow clack, clack, clack echoes in his cockpit. He is out of 20mm ammunition. Only his smaller 13mm machine guns remain, useless against the armour plating of the flying fortress. Simultaneously, a sharp, deafening crack rings out. A stray .50 caliber armour-piercing round from the B-17's tail gunner smashes through Eric's canopy plexiglass, missing his helmet by mere inches, and buries itself in the armoured headrest behind him. Spidery cracks webbing across his vision, Eric instinctively flinches, jerking the control stick away. His fuel is bingo, his heavy ammunition is spent, and the Americans are still shooting back. With a mixture of profound frustration and an undeniable, begrudging respect, Eric Kessler pushes his Fokker-Wulf into a shallow dive, rolling away toward the German coastline. He looks back over his shoulder one last time at the smoking, shattered Silver Cross limping toward the horizon. He will write in his combat report tonight that the B-17S are not aircraft, they are flying anvils. Alone in the hostile sky, the crew of Iron Rain begins a torturous, agonizing 3-hour journey back to England. They drop altitude, descending to 10,000 feet, where the air is breathable and marginally warmer, though the wind tearing through the open fuselage still bites like razor blades. With the right wing producing immense drag, fuel consumption on the remaining 2 engines skyrockets. They are burning too much gas. They are too heavy. "Lighten the ship," Tommy's voice crackles over the intercom, exhausted but commanding. Throw everything out. We need to shed weight right now. In the waist of the bomber, Staff Sergeant Barnes and Sergeant Miller, their hands numb and bleeding, become frantic movers. They unlatch the heavy .50 caliber machine guns and shove them out the gaping hole in the fuselage. They toss out heavy wooden ammunition boxes, belts of brass rounds, flak jackets, toolkits, and shattered radio equipment. In the nose, the bombardier kicks the highly classified 80-pound Norden bomb sight out of the escape hatch, watching it tumble into the grey waters of the English Channel below. They strip the bomber bare, shedding thousands of pounds of dead weight just to keep the crippled bird from slipping into the sea. Every minute is a physical battle. Tommy and Davy swap out every 15 minutes, their legs shaking violently from the immense pressure required to hold the left rudder down. The remaining engines scream a high-pitched, desperate whine, pushed far beyond their red-line parameters. Then, through the salt-sprayed, cracked plexiglass of the cockpit, a greyish-white smudge appears on the horizon. "Land ho," Davy breathes, his voice cracking. It is the chalky coastline of Dover. They have made it to English airspace, but the ordeal is far from over. Iron Rain is bleeding hydraulic fluid, meaning they have no brakes and no way to lower the heavy main landing gear. Furthermore, the shattered tail section means Tommy has virtually no pitch control to flare the aircraft for a gentle touchdown. They are directed to RAF Woodbridge, an emergency landing strip boasting a massive, extra-wide, extra-long runway specifically designed for crippled bombers coming in hot. "Brace for crash landing," Tommy calls out. "We're going in on the belly." The crew assumes the crash position, burying their heads in their knees, bracing against the bulkheads. Tommy lines up the massive runway, fighting the asymmetric drag to the bitter end. He cuts the power to the two surviving engines just feet above the ground. Without the thrust, the heavy bomber drops like a stone. Iron Rain hits the dirt overrun of the runway with a world-ending, thunderous screech. The belly of the bomber ploughs into the earth, throwing up massive rooster tails of mud, rocks and sparks. The terrible sound of twisting duralumin and snapping spars fills the cabin as the bomber slides at over 100 miles per hour, acting as a massive sled. It grinds along the earth, spinning slightly to the right, before finally, mercifully, violently jerking to a dead halt in a cloud of choking white dust and smoke. Silence descends. It is sudden, absolute and surreal after hours of deafening, mechanical screaming. For a moment, nothing moves. Then, the shattered roof hatch above the cockpit kicks open. Tommy Hayes pulls himself out, followed by Davy. One by one, from the waist door and the nose hatch, the battered, frostbitten and exhausted crew members emerge into the damp, quiet English afternoon. They stumble away from the smoking wreckage, turning back to look at the machine that had carried them home. Crash rescue crews in jeeps and fire trucks race toward them, but the men simply stand and stare. Sitting in the mud, Iron Rain looks completely unrecognisable as an aircraft. The tail is a mangled stump of jagged metal. The right wing is practically sawed in half. The fuselage is riddled with over 300 bullet and cannon holes, a massive chunk of its midsection completely vaporised. By every metric of aerodynamics, structural integrity and logic, the machine should have disintegrated over the freezing waters of the North Sea. But the thick ribs of aluminum, the redundant spars, and the sheer, stubborn will of 10 young men had defied the arithmetic of war. The German interceptors had thrown everything they had at the flying behemoth, but they had fundamentally misunderstood their enemy. They were not fighting an airplane, they were fighting a fortress.